right, welcome everyone. So I first want to start out with a little story with a very fun photo of one of my most memorable moments in teaching. So I have been a special education teacher for about 10 years, and it was a very exciting day in my life. If we could go to the next slide. I will show I got the clicker, that's right, thank you. That's right, I have it. So here is me on one of my very favorite days of being a special educator. If you notice, I'm wearing a bike helmet. That's because I had a student who was doing some bike skills in adaptive PE class and then decided just to take off in the middle of rural Wisconsin. So I threw on my bike helmet. I got we had elementary school sized bikes. I didn't think to grab an adult one. I don't know what I was thinking. And then underneath the bike helmet, I'm also wearing a dinosaur hat. So I was hoping that would be my big motivator to get this student back into school because this particular student really loved dinosaurs. So I'm pedaling. I find my student. We're on our way back to school. And we get back to school, and the student and I just have this conversation about this is just a really scary place to be in this school building for the student. They'd had a lot of childhood trauma, and it was much easier just to kind of escape than to be in the school building. And I had just started a doctoral program and was thinking about all of these social emotional skills that I had hoped for my special education students. And really, how can we help our students stay in the classroom? How can we reduce that anxiety, that depression, that stress that so many of them face day to day? And I myself was kind of going through my own mental health. For those of you that have been in graduate school or have taught full-time, it can be a very stressful situation. After one night with a panic attack at 3 in the morning, sitting on my couch Googling how to prevent panic attacks. I don't know if anyone else has ever done that. I found mindfulness. And so I started practicing mindfulness my first year in my doctoral program, and it really helped me as an individual. And so I was just really interested in how I can bring those skills into the classroom. Does this actually help my students? Is there evidence for that? And as a special education administrator, what does this actually look like to implement within a school setting? So today I'm really hoping to talk to you about 3 different things. So first, really establishing a baseline definition of what is mindfulness. And then second, how does mindfulness potentially help our students? And third, how can we be good consumers of mindfulness-based interventions? What are some things that we want to look for when choosing a program? Oops. All right, so let's first talk about what is mindfulness. So mindfulness is informed by a variety of disciplines, contemplative sciences, medicine, psychology, and education as well. And we have this gentleman named Jon Kabat-Zinn, who's kind of the father of secular mindfulness. For those of you that have studied mindfulness or been involved in mindfulness-based interventions, a lot of our school-based programs are modeled after the work that he has done. And his definition of mindfulness that's commonly used is that mindfulness is the awareness that emerges through paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally to the unfolding of experience moment by moment. So when we break that down, when we think about this from a school's perspective or a researcher perspective, there's really 3 different ways that we think of mindfulness. So there's the first one is having a present moment focus. So present moment focus is we're really starting to think about noticing what's happening. So I am noticing that, wow, I'm really hearing that dish in the background. I'm noticing that I'm starting to think about that math class that I have coming up quite a bit for me. So really just starting to have that present moment, think about what we're noticing. And the second piece is we call it decentering. And I like to think of decentering as just kind of taking a literal or kind of figurative step back from our beliefs and really from any judgment that we might be attaching to those beliefs. We're just going to notice that I'm thinking about that dish, and I'm going to try to let that go. And then the third piece of this we call an approach orientation. So this is where we make a choice based on those thoughts that are coming up for us, rather than just acting impulsively, especially for our students who might have some emotional distress, where we're just going to hit our friend, really focusing then on making some active choices in this matter. So I wear kind of two hats. I'm both a special education administrator and a researcher, and I promise that this is the only slide that I will have that looks like my researcher hat tonight, but I have to include a little bit here. So this slide is from the American Mindfulness Research Association, and really just shows how much mindfulness has taken off in our society. And I don't know about all of you, but it seems for me like I cannot look at Ed Week or other publications, The Atlantic, without hearing about mindfulness. And so we know that that's just really taking off in our schools. We're hearing a lot about it as adults. And there were 667 publications in 2016 on mindfulness. So there's a lot of research that's going on about this. And the research base for adults is quite strong. So as I mentioned, I started using it when I first started my doctoral program. I've experienced a lot of benefits from it. There is some really solid evidence that shows some medium effects for anxiety, depression, stress, self-kindness, a really great host of benefits. But as an educator, I wanted to know, does this actually work in our schools? Can this be effective for the students that I serve? So that brings us to the state of mindfulness research for youth, for children and adolescents. So I think this picture kind of summarizes it well. So we think of mindfulness as this beautiful, kind of calm place, Zen-like, but there's some cautions and warnings ahead. So the first mindfulness study with youth really only occurred in 2002. So we have a pretty young research base that we're working with. By most accounts, depending on how you measure empirical research and studies, there's about 40 to 60 studies out there that are high quality studies that have been done in school settings. So we don't have a lot yet of research that we're pulling from to really demonstrate effects with mindfulness. Of those research studies, about 60% have an active control group where students are receiving perhaps another social-emotional curriculum. There's a researcher at the U of M that has used like a relaxation curriculum as well as a mindfulness curriculum, and actually found that relaxation curriculum had similar benefits of the mindfulness curriculum. So we have some that have had those control groups. And then we have about 10% that have had, 10 to 30% that have really had no control group or no active control group. So the state of these studies are not necessarily super high quality that we would want to see with our research, but they are getting better. So that's really positive. There is such a movement to look at mindfulness and explore this so that we are seeing more of a focus here. Another caution that I would add is that the majority of the research has been done in the middle school and high school settings, and very little of it has been done with students, minority students or students from low socioeconomic status. So we also, as practitioners, as educators, we want to be thinking about that when we're implementing these things in our schools. So like I said, and was mentioned in my biography, I did a pilot research program last year in 3 middle schools using a mindfulness program called Learning to Breathe. And I'll start by just sharing a quote from one of our participants. So I felt kind of weird about it at first, but then started to like it. I realized some things that were stressing me out were out of my control. I'm opening up more and like learning to love myself a little bit. In the end, I liked it. This is a really common sentiment from a lot of youth that go through mindfulness-based programs. Ironically, when they look at programs, they sometimes ask kids to compare it to other sort of curriculum that they might hear about. So one research study had the DARE program as the other control, the treatment control. And kids actually voted, they thought the DARE program would be more effective than mindfulness. So that's, kind of how low kids perceive mindfulness at first. For those of us that have been through the DARE program, I'm sure we kind of know the effects of that. So, but kids really like this. The research that I did, 90% of the participants were actually middle school boys. And again, wonderful things. 100% of them thought that we should continue to do mindfulness. Really, really, really believed strongly in this. So even though the state of the science is a little bit low, we're hearing just wonderful, wonderful things from our students and our teachers about mindfulness. These are some of the potential benefits of mindfulness that we have seen so far in the research that's been conducted. So the majority of the research has really looked at stress, anxiety, and depression. And when we think about stress, the benefit really coming from reducing that kind of mental time travel. So for a lot of our students and for us, we might have ruminations about feelings or things coming up. And having mindfulness and having some of those skills can help reduce those ruminations. We're able to stay more, again, in that present moment focus. And that also helps us to really increase our relaxation, our acceptance of that moment without having any judgment tied to what might be going on. Ironically, there's actually a research study that was done where they had students do just a single session of mindfulness compared to doing just some sort of general problem solving with a teacher. And that single session of mindfulness was more effective at reducing anxiety and depression for those students in that study. So kind of amazing effects there. There's also some evidence that mindfulness can reduce externalizing behaviors. So externalizing behaviors are things that we kind of outwardly see. So things like aggression, maybe one of those. There's a great researcher for my special education friends in the house who's done some work with students with autism around externalizing behaviors and aggression using a technique called meditation on the soles of the feet, and has really seen some dramatic reductions in episodes of aggression from students. So again, there's some really nice research that's out there as well. Self-kindness, again, is another big category. This is one that we really saw in the research that I did. The students reporting just much higher levels of self-acceptance, self-compassion. There were a few participants in the study who were involved in the baseball team at one of the middle schools that we were at, and they spread mindfulness to their entire baseball team. So they would lead their team in different meditative sessions, and then really started to use it when they were out on the field. So one student said that whenever he would have a strikeout before doing mindfulness-based interventions, he would just shut down. He would stop playing the rest of the game. He couldn't recover. But after learning some techniques, he was really able to have that self-kindness and compassion to be able to keep playing and moving on with that game. So that was a really big change for him. Empathy for others, again, is another big area here, and I'm sure we can all agree that this is something that we really want in our students and in our society at this point, is increasing that empathy. One of my favorite studies that's been done kind of from an adult standpoint that I'd really love to see replicated in a school is where they have participants do mindfulness, and then participants do like another, maybe like a relaxation component. And then they create these conditions where they'll bring the people in that had done the mindfulness-based training, and then they'll have, perhaps 3 seats in a lobby. 2 will be taken. The mindfulness person will come sit down, and then they'll have someone come in with, looks like they have a broken foot, to see if someone will give up their chair for that person. And interestingly, the people that have done mindfulness are 2 times as likely to give up their chair, so they can demonstrate some of those empathic qualities in something as simple as that. So kind of fascinating stuff. I'd love to see a similar sort of thing replicated in a school setting. And then next is executive function. So again, we see a host of benefits from executive function. And for those of you that aren't familiar with that term, I really like to think of executive function as if we kind of have like a personal assistant that lives in our brain that can help us set goals, plan our day, break down tasks that we have to do. And so mindfulness is another good tool that we've seen to increase that executive function in our students, really by helping kind of train those neural pathways and really strengthen those to be able to do some of those tasks. Attention as well. We've seen a lot of great research using mindfulness with our students with ADHD. So there's been a lot of really great clinical studies showing that mindfulness can be as effective as a medicine treatment for ADHD. So again, stuff that we're still trying to implement in schools to make sure that those treatment effects continue, but some really great evidence that's there. And last is that blood pressure and heart rate. So there's again been some studies demonstrating that there's some physical benefits for our youth by doing mindfulness-based interventions. So how do we be good consumers of mindfulness-based programs? We know that there is evidence out there. It's still pretty limited, but it's encouraging. We're starting to see more evidence be collected. It's moving in the right direction. But then how do we, as practitioners, as educators, as parents, choose programs that are really going to work for us? Because we know that there has been so much attention to mindfulness, we want to make sure that we're being good stewards here, being good consumers. So these are just some examples of things that are essential and flexible when looking at mindfulness-based programs. So we really want to make sure, again, that it's informed by a multiple variety of disciplines. So contemplative science, psychology, education, medicine, making sure that they're focusing on those components of mindfulness that I talked about earlier, so that present moment focus, decentering, approach orientation, that they are talking about the types of benefits that we hope to see in our schools. So things like self-regulation, self-compassion. And that really when we're looking at a mindfulness-based curriculum, we want to see that it's more experiential in nature, rather than something that's more typical of direct instruction, sort of lecture standpoint. So really providing students with exercises that approach it in that way, in an experiential way. And then some flexible components here as well, so making sure we are adapting that curriculum to fit the needs of our school setting. So for example, since I was researching in middle schools and in special education settings, we chose a mindfulness-based intervention that was much shorter than others, so it was just 20-minute sessions 3 times a week to really make sure that we were aligning with the attention span of the students that we were working with and really getting the best bang for our buck there. These are just some other tips around choosing a program, and I really think that this is applicable not just for mindfulness, but as well for choosing a reading curriculum, a math curriculum, things that we want to consider as an educator. So the first is students and setting. So when looking at a program, does that practice or program actually address the skills that I'm interested in? There's a variety of mindfulness programs out there, so again, making sure that that aligns with what I need. Looking a little bit at that research. So as I mentioned, there's definitely been a gap in mindfulness research for minority youth, for youth with low socioeconomic status. So considering, has the researcher actually looked at these populations? Have they included different subgroups, like English as a second language students or special education students? What are the demographics that they've worked with? And what were the conditions that they used this program in? So a lot of the mindfulness research has been done in more clinical settings, such as a therapist's office or actually even in a parent's home. So making sure, has this actually been implemented in a school setting? How do we know that this is going to work for a school? And then I also think resources are really important. So a lot of times we kind of, at least I kind of kid myself into thinking that, oh, this like $40,000 curriculum is going to be awesome, without really thinking through my school's capability of being able to implement it. So does my school have the resources to do this? Are we going to need to hire a mindfulness trainer who could come in and deliver the lessons, or can we teach our staff to be able to do this? What other kind of resources do we need? Do we need a different classroom to host this in? So thinking through some of those variables upon implementing a program like this. And then also that evidence level. So as an educator, it's super hard to be reading research or having the time to do that and capacity. So looking for other places that can already do some of this work for you to help you kind of guide and choose a program. So Mindful Schools has some great resources out there. My website, I also send out information on different programs as well. So happy to help connect on that too. And then finally, these were just some considerations that have come out of looking at the research on implementation in school settings, and also in my own mindfulness research. Some best practices that we really want to keep in mind when we're implementing a program. And in many ways, these are really just examples of good teaching, of things that we do no matter the content. So having a really clear and consistent procedure for teaching lessons. In my study, our teachers used the same lesson plan setup and then varied their exercises during that, just to make it consistent for our students. We used some kind of visual and auditory symbols for students when we were transitioning to different sections, again, to just sort of self-cue that we're starting to do maybe a meditation or things like that. And then working on trust. So a lot of the students and focus groups talked about just how kind of scary it was in the beginning to practice mindfulness with their peers. And so having really a welcoming space, creating that trust between participants can go a long way in producing some really positive outcomes. And then creating that welcoming and private space. So for example, one of the schools that we were in, we had to use the computer lab for our mindfulness intervention, which was really disruptive, and one of the things that the students really said was really tough for them, because they would have peers come in to print something in the lab, or just kind of kids in and out, which really disrupted the flow. There's been some other researchers in Baltimore that have also seen this if they use spaces like gyms, for example, that can be kind of dirty and dusty, or there might be windows where other kids can peer in. So again, creating that really nice space and environment is one of the things that kids report often as a really important consideration for them, which I know can be kind of tough sometimes in our schools. And then focusing on the treatment dose. So this is something in my own research that I'm really focusing a lot on right now. When we look at programs for adults in mindfulness, these are often much longer programs than the ones that we're using for our students. So it's kind of silly to me to think that a sixth grader with ASD, with autism, is going to be able to pick this up faster than an adult, maybe, but we probably also want to have a little bit longer program that can go on for that student to really acquire those skills. So I'm working a lot right now and thinking about how we can sort of set this up as a multi-tiered system of support with different levels of mindfulness intervention depending on that student's need. So something also to think about in your own schools, how we can really differentiate some of that instruction. So just to summarize, again, we know that there are some really wonderful things happening in our schools with mindfulness. We don't quite have the robust research base yet to show that that scientific evidence is really pointing overwhelmingly positive in that direction, but it is coming along, and we are starting to see more of that. One thing we should also mention is that there have been some studies that are starting to show some potential negative effects that we also want to keep an eye on. So in my own study, our students showed actually decreases in self-efficacy, so a belief that they could be in charge of their classwork, that they could be self-regulated in that capacity. And we kind of think that that's because before they were rating themselves super high, they didn't know and have those tools to be able to accurately self-assess where they were. But there is that potential negative effect as well. There's some studies that have shown actually some increases in anxiety for males in particular. So we want to be careful around some of those things, as well as children that have experienced trauma, potentially reactivating any bodily trauma through some of those things like body scans or practices in mindfulness. So we want to just be careful, think about some of those potential harms, keep an eye on that. But we also know that there's just overwhelmingly positive support for mindfulness programs in our schools. All of the students that I have worked with, all of the teachers that I have worked with continue to use mindfulness, continue to believe in it as an intervention. And so I firmly believe that we can't just kind of live in our head. We also have to think about all of those other things that we're seeing in our schools. And really, it's up to people that are researching this to also start to consider all of those other avenues as well. So I'd like to just close with a poem that really kind of spoke to me in the current state where we are in our society, and really spoke again to the need to continue using mindfulness in our schools and increasing social emotional skills just because of the power of our society and where we need to be. So this is a poem by Gary Lawless. When the animals come to us asking for our help, will we know what they are saying? When the plants speak to us in their delicate, beautiful language, will we be able to answer them? When the planet herself sings to us in our dreams, will we be able to wake ourselves and act? So thank you.